Hey guys, tonight we step onto the crumbling doorstep of an empire so vast it once spanned 3 continents, and you can almost taste the musty echoes of crushed parchment in these empty marble halls. Flickering torchlight paints dancing ghosts on fallen statues as you shuffle through corridors where the faint scent of mildew mingles with the memory of triumphs long gone. You probably won't survive this knowledge blackout, but don't let that scare you off. We're in this together, digging through the rubble for hints of ancient wisdom. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments below, so I know exactly where you are clinging to these whispered tales. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Trust me, by the end you'll have goosebumps from more than just the chill in these decaying archives. You trudge across sun-bleached stones that once echoed with triumphant legions, now silent except for your soft footsteps and the distant drip of water from cracked aqueducts. Every chipped mosaic tile whispers of chariot races and senate debates that faded into memory the moment Romulus Augustulus bowed to Odoacer in 476 AD, marking the Western Roman Empire's fall. Without emperors to commission schools and civic libraries, classical education unravels almost overnight. Imperial academies shutter, public scrolls disintegrate, and knowledge once as common as street vendors. Shouts becomes as rare as fresh bread on a winter dawn. Your fingers brush against broken scrolls, papyrus fibers, rough as old linen, and the stale air tastes like burnt toast on a rainy day. There is no Google here, just dust echoes and the ghosts of philosophers. It's basically your Wi-Fi, dying during peak binge-watching. Only substitute Netflix for Cicero's speeches, Major F. You might crack a smile picturing a monk trying to trend on medieval Twitter. Jokes aside, the silence screams louder than Colosseum crowds, and you feel the sting of isolation as attention drifts into oblivion. In the dust-choked rooms where scholars once sparred over ethics, you now find only spiderwebs clinging to empty shelves and the echo of dripping ceilings. Mainstream history tells us that by the early 6th century, literacy in Western Europe had plummeted to single digits. Among the elite, classical knowledge slipped through citizens' fingers like water down a drain. Fringe tales whisper that desperate keepers of lore sometimes coated surviving manuscripts in onion juice or even crocodile dung to ward off rot. Yes, crocodile dung. An image that makes a great punchline at medieval comedy clubs. Historians still argue whether the true break happened with Alaric's sack of Rome in 410 or Romulus Augustulus' fall in 476, a debate as heated as any YouTube comment war you've witnessed. You pore over brittle fragments of Ovid's Metamorphoses, hunting golden lines like Easter eggs in a half-finished game. It feels absurdly tragic and oddly compelling, like binge-watching a show where half the episodes vanished, giving you FOMO for events you never lived. Tracking knowledge in this shadow of an empire feels like scavenging for Wi-Fi in a deserted cybercafe with nothing but cobweb-covered terminals. Once Rome teemed with over 1 million souls, by the 6th century, its grand forums echo only with the cawing of roosting birds, and urban centers across Europe shrink to towns of under 50,000 residents. Trade corridors fracture into impassable trails, and you find preaching amphitheaters empty, as if Alexa decided to ghost you forever. Without imperial patronage, artisans lose their masters, scribes lose their clients, and the torch of learning dims until only tiny flickers survive in remote monasteries. Within those stone cloisters, a handful of monks risk ink-stained fingers and sore knees to hand-copy what they can salvage of Cicero and Aristotle. Their scripts often adorned with doodles of cats chasing quills, or knights jousting with carrots become fragile time capsules, early medieval meme makers, if you will. You grin at the absurdity imagining a monk sharing his doodle on a monastery bulletin board. The smell of candle smoke drifts through arches like an overcooked stew, reminding you that Europe has slipped into a 1,000-year nap, leaving the cradle of civilization snoring beneath a blanket of dust. You step out into a chilling dusk, the sky above the forum painted in bruised purples, as if Rome herself is nursing a migraine. The lack of public readings, theatre performances, or philosophical debates leaves your mind craving stimulation like a late-night snacker raiding the pantry. Imagine a world where your smartphone never existed and the closest thing to Google is an ancient stone tablet gathering moss. The cost of this intellectual blackout is staggering for centuries. Europe fumbles in the dark innovation stall, and the very idea of progress becomes a whispered rumor. There are no coffee houses buzzing with debate, no scribblers publishing essays, only the distant chants of vespers echoing across empty plazas. You might pity the average peasant, but even the elite finds themselves retreating into rote tradition, repeating prayers they barely understand without grasp of their classical roots. It feels strangely cozy, yet alarmingly stagnant, like watching your favorite show on endless loop because you forgot how to scroll for something new. In this twilight of knowledge, you come to appreciate the fragility of learning and the lengths to which later generations must go to reclaim what was lost. And as the faint outline of a crumbling library looms ahead, you steel yourself for the next chapter, where solitary scribes keep the flicker alive against overwhelming odds. Your journey into this shadowed age has only just begun. Here in this vast intellectual hibernation, you marvel at how delicate the chain of human progress truly is. One lost scroll, one abandoned schoolhouse, one forgotten syllable can tilt centuries toward silence. Yet you're here, ears attuned to the faint murmur of memory, ready to piece together what once was. As you inhale the chilly air, thick with echoes, you realize tonight's tale is not just about loss, it's about the tenacity of those who refuse to let darkness swallow all. You slip through a narrow archway into a hush so deep it wraps around you like a velvet blanket. Flickers of candlelight dance against stone walls, casting gentle shadows over wooden desks crowded with ink pots and vellum. The smell of beeswax and fermented wine presses in on you, mingling with the earthy tang of moss creeping through the cracks. This is the scriptorium center of the monastic preservation effort that became the lifeline of Western learning. Here, clad in rough wool habits, monks bend over desks for hours on end, their quills scratching out tiny perfect letters in Carolingian, minuscule, the standardized script developed under Charlemagne's reign to make text legible across his realm. By the 9th century, this elegant handwriting style spread like medieval Arial, ensuring that a book copied in Aachen could be read in Lyon. That standardization is one of the first mainstream historical facts you piece together in this quiet realm. Your senses settle on the repetitive scratch, scratch, scratch of quills on parchment, punctuated by the occasional sigh and the rasp of pages being turned. A breeze drifts through a narrow window, ruffling the fine hair on your neck as you imagine the strain on the monk's shoulders and knees. No ergonomic chairs here, just stone floors and sturdy oak benches. You can almost feel the mild medieval chiropractor's office waiting in the cloister. Amid this solemn devotion, you stumble upon a quirky, marginal note, a tiny doodle of a rabbit, wearing a bishop's mitre, hopping across the text of Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. Legend says some monks added these incongruous figures to maintain focus during long copying sessions. Historians still argue whether these doodles were meaningful commentary or simply caffeine-free antics to stave off boredom. You lean in closer to observe one particularly bizarre detail at the bottom of a gospel manuscript. Someone scrawled a recipe for spiced mead, complete with instructions to stir with a long porcupine quill. It's the kind of fringe tidbit that makes you grin. Imagine turning to the last page of a physics textbook and finding Grandma's muffin recipe written in the margin. Despite the solemnity, a sleepy ASMR cadence takes over your thoughts as you watch ink pools forming dark, glossy letters that dry into a matte finish. You almost expect the walls to hum medieval Spotify, but instead you hear distant chants from the chapel, a soothing refrain marking each psalm. The juxtaposition of divine music with the tactile dance of quill tip and parchment feels strangely restful, like binge-watching ASMR unboxing videos, but replace the cardboard crinkle with a gentle whisper of vellum. As you drift from desk to desk, you notice pairs of monks collaborating. One reads aloud from an exemplar copy, while the other transcribes, ensuring accuracy. This teamwork reduces the risk of transcription errors, though slip-ups still happen. One famously awkward error turned Christus into Christusculus, unintentionally creating a little Christ and earning giggles from later readers. You can't help but chuckle at the thought of a tiny cherubic deity popping up in place of solemn scripture. The ambient scent of ink reminds you of fresh latte art. Except here the art is literal, with elaborate illuminated initials bedecked in gold leaf that catches the candle flame like glittering confetti. These embellishments weren't just for show, they guided readers' eyes to chapter beginnings and important passages. Without them, you'd be squinting at block text like someone scrolling through an endless terms of service agreement. In this cloistered world, isolation breeds not only preservation but also innovation. Some scriptoria invented shorthand notation to speed up copying. Others developed coded symbols to represent common Latin phrases, early medieval emojis, if you will. Historians still argue whether these shorthand systems evolved locally or were taught by itinerant scholars moving between monastic centers, but their impact on productivity is undeniable. Monks could crank out manuscripts faster than you can scroll through TikTok. You catch a glimpse of a monk pausing to dip his quill into a dark amber ink made from oak galls and iron sulfate. The metallic scent cuts through the candle smoke haze, and you wonder how many manuscripts bear stains from shaky hands or unexpected sneezes. One account claims a monk's sneeze obliterated an entire page of Psalms in 742 AD, prompting frantic rewriting by his colleagues. That's teamwork under pressure. Picture your co-worker spilling coffee all over your report and you calmly rewriting the entire thing before lunch. Your gaze drifts to a pile of unfinished texts waiting their turn, works of Aristotle Galen's medical treatises, fragments of Tertullian. Some volumes sit untouched for months, awaiting a monk skilled in Greek or Hebrew. This bottleneck highlights a critical challenge. Literacy was uneven and multilingual scholars were prized like platinum records. You can almost hear the monks grumbling, "Where's my Rosetta Stone when I need it?" They labored over texts as if they were rare collectibles, which in a way they were. The hours blur into one another as you wander through aisles of desks lined with the vellum and quill stubs. Your mind drifts to the vast network of monasteries, stretching from Ireland's Emerald Hills to the sun-baked hills of Aquitaine, each one a tiny beacon of preservation. You imagine these scriptoria as medieval data centers, only without air conditioning or backup generators. Yet somehow they kept the flame of learning alive through centuries of turmoil. As the candle burns low, you notice entries detailing astronomical observations. A monk recording the unexpected appearance of a comet in 840 AD, marveling at its fiery tail slicing through the night sky. That observational zeal laid foundations for later scholars, which is no small feat in a world where superstition often outweighed empirical study. You smile at the thought that these early sky watchers were the precursors to our modern NASA enthusiasts, minus the zero-gravity snacks. By the time you slip out of the scriptorium, the first pale light of dawn filters through the lancet windows. Your ears still ring with the soft rhythmic chant of copying, and your fingertips tingle from handling manuscript corners. You realize that every text you just witnessed has survived floods, fires, and inquisitions to reach you an astonishing commitment to legacy. So, as you step back into the chill morning air, you carry with you the weight of centuries-old devotion, grateful for those ink-stained hands that made your own late-night browsing possible. And while modern libraries offer instant downloads, remember that without this monastic army of scribes, you'd have nothing but blank screens and empty shopping carts. Their tiny candlelit rooms were the unsung servers of the Dark Ages, storing and transmitting the code of civilization so it could reboot centuries later. Sweet dreams, and when you drift off, ponder the power of a single quill in rewriting the fate of human progress. You step out of the hushed monastery courtyard into a crisp dawn breeze that carries the faint aroma of pine smoke from distant hearths. Frost crunches beneath your boots as you trudge toward a grand hall draped in tapestries depicting knights and scholars alike. This is Charlemagne's palace at Aachen, where around the year 800 AD the ruler known as Charles the Great sets in motion an educational revolution. He convenes the palace school, assembling scribes, poets, and clergymen to standardize learning across his vast Frankish realm, an empire stretching from the Pyrenees to the Elbe River mainstream. Fact. Inside the vaulted chamber, glow of low-hung oil lamps reveals long wooden tables heaped with wax tablets, papyrus scrolls, and newly commissioned codices. The air is warm with the scent of melting beeswax. Every lesson begins with wax for writing practice and lingers with the spicy tang of imported frankincense, a gift from eunuchs at the Byzantine court. You almost expect monks to hum Gregorian chants in perfect unison, but instead overhear heated debate. Who was the greater rhetorician, Cicero or Demosthenes, such that even echoes bounce back with scholarly fervor? As you draw nearer, you glimpse Alcuin of York, the famous Anglo-Saxon scholar handpicked by Charlemagne to head this academic brigade. His robes brush against the marble floor as he inspects a student's handwriting, murmuring corrections in a lilting accent. Under his guidance, Carolingian minuscule morphs into a curriculum cornerstone. Historians still argue whether this script alone constitutes Charlemagne's greatest legacy, or if his true triumph was galvanizing intellectual unity across fractious territories. You settle on a bench carved with interlacing vines and watch as young nobles, those with plucked forelocks to show humility, copy passages from Livy's History of Rome and gloss them with Latin to Frankish translations in pencil-thin strokes. Their quills dip and rise in rhythmic waves, like synchronized swimmers performing penmanship. One student frowns so hard that you imagine ink might squirt from his ears, and you stifle a grin. It's basically the medieval equivalent of your little cousin furrowing her brow at algebra homework. A quirky tidbit scuttles across your mind. Legend holds that Charlemagne tested prospective teachers by hiding a gold ring in a pile of fancy codices, rewarding only the sharp-eyed scholar who discovered it, his own version of finders keepers. Whether this actually happened or is simply court gossip that blossomed over centuries is anyone's guess, but it paints a delightful picture of a king with a treasure hunt sense of humor. The hall thrums with activity when a messenger in chainmail stomps in, bearing a question from a provincial abbey. How do we teach Greek grammar when most scribes can barely read Latin? Alcuin smiles and proposes a set of glossaries and language primers to accompany every text, early medieval Rosetta Stones that pave the way for multilingual scholarship. The room erupts in murmured approval, and you can practically taste the excitement, like waiting for your favorite app update, but with parchment instead of pixels. Your fingertips tap the bench, keeping time with a scratch of quills, an occasional cough from a student who forgot breakfast. You breathe in the smoky warmth and can't help but contrast this lively scene with a lonely scriptoria you visited earlier. Here, education is communal, almost festive. There's camaraderie in mastering Latin declensions together. You might compare it to a modern coding bootcamp, except instead of JavaScript and latte art, they're obsessing over verb conjugations and chalice chants. A low whisper drifts from a corner. Next week, His Majesty plans to commission almanacs detailing seasonal tides and eclipses. You lift your head, astronomy again, reinforcing that the Church's early scientists weren't just stone-faced theologians, but curious sky-gazers, mapping comets and equinoxes for practical calendars. It's no small feat. Knowing when to plant crops or hold festivals depends on accurate timekeeping. Histories still argue whether Charlemagne's interest in astronomy stemmed from genuine curiosity or sheer political savvy to control harvests. Either way, you find it strangely comforting that kings once worried about missing the spring sowing as much as you fret over choosing the right time for your morning jog. Your gaze wanders to the carved lectern where a scribe unrolls a fresh manuscript. The page is bordered by a series of bizarre caricatures. Tiny monks engaged in pillow fights, a bishop juggling apples, and a dragon calmly sipping tea from a chalice. You giggle at the idea of dragons enjoying Earl Grey under Gothic arches. These illuminations served not only as decorative flair, but also as mnemonic devices, visual puns that helped students recall complex theological arguments. Historians still argue whether these images were officially sanctioned, teaching tools or secret inside jokes among the learned elite, but their oddity feels like discovering Easter eggs in a video game. A bell tolls, echoing through the hall like a gentle alarm clock. It signals the end of the morning lecture and the beginning of a midday repast. You follow the flow of students toward long tables where bowls of pottage, steam oats, leeks, and a hint of salt pork floating like buoys. The earthy aroma mingles with a distant hiss of spiced wine being decanted. One noble grumbles that the pottage tastes like muddy bathwater, prompting his neighbor to quip back. Better than another sermon on nominalism, you chuckle, realizing academic snark transcends millennia. Over bowls of pottage, conversation drifts from grammatical conundrums to moral puzzles. If God is omnipotent, can he create a rock so heavy that even he cannot lift it? Such discussions bubble like a philosophy-themed game show, minus the flashy set and theme music. You scoop a spoonful, thinking how different it is from your late-night ramen runs during study sessions. Here every bite connects to the broader tapestry of faith, reason, and power. As the meal winds down, you drift back to the benches, shoulders relaxed from the mid-morning stretch. You pull a stray quill from the floor, probably fallen from someone who got too enthusiastic writing out Boethius's metaphysical musings. The hall feels like a living organism, pulsing with the collective heartbeat of seekers determined to revive learning across a fragmented land. Before you exit, you pause to observe a final scene. Charlemagne himself strides in his ornate cloak, brushing the stone floor, cheeks flushed from inspection. He surveys the students with a satisfied nod, then addresses them directly, emphasizing that literacy and standardized learning will bind his empire together as nothing else can. You catch his eye for a fleeting moment, and you feel the weight of history settle a vision of unity through education, powerful enough to outlast armies and dynasties. As you step back into the courtyard's chill, the sound of quills scratching fades into the morning chorus of sparrows. You realize that Charlemagne's school reforms weren't just royal fads. They rekindled a flame of collective learning that flickered in Europe's darkest hours and guided it toward revival. That same spark, centuries later, ignites your midnight curiosity as you press play on this very journey. You step into the cavernous nave of a medieval cathedral, just as dawn's pale light filters through stained glass windows, painting the stone floor in jewel-toned patterns. The air smells of incense and damp flagstones, each breath charged with the weight of whispered prayers and centuries of devotion. A low murmur drifts from the chancel, where clerics gather around curious devices that hum with possibility. This is where the Church's early scientists quietly bend heaven's motions to human needs. At the center of the group, a monk adjusts an astrolabe, a brass star map tool that tracks celestial coordinates with the precision of a modern GPS, only powered by your steady hand and the occasional candle flame. He tilts the instrument toward the glowing sphere of the rising sun, eyes narrowing behind wireframe spectacles that look like they should be charging your phone battery. With careful clicks and alignments, he measures the solar altitude, calculating the sun's position to within a degree. No small feat when your nearest benchmark is a sheep grazing outside a half-collapsed wall. Nearby, another cleric peers into a rudimentary equatorium, a wooden replica of the planetary circles that models lunar and solar paths. He twists a disc and notes the date when Easter should fall, an exercise known as the computus, crucial for aligning the liturgical calendar. You realize that without these painstaking calculations, villagers would be stuck celebrating Easter in January or October, leading to festival confusion rivaling your last New Year's countdown fiasco. A mainstream historical fact emerges as you listen. By the early 8th century, the Venerable Bede had written De Temporum Ratione, on the reckoning of time, outlining lunar months and solar cycles to determine Easter's date, laying groundwork for medieval astronomy and calendar science. His work spread through monastic networks faster than you can refresh your email inbox, giving clerics a common framework to track the cosmos rather than relying on local gossip about sunspots. You lean against a cold pillar, absorbing the soft clunk of water-powered clocks marking the hours. These verge escapement mechanisms use flowing water to regulate gear wheels, a medieval Airbnb for timekeeping, less cozy than a smart speaker, but remarkably effective. One clever abbey even rigged up a system that rang bells at canonical hours, effectively automating prayer reminders centuries before Siri could, "Hey Google, your schedule." Amid these earnest experiments, a quirky fringe tidbit surfaces. Rumors persist that a certain alchemical-minded priest attempted to capture lightning in a glass jar to study weather patterns, only to produce a jar full of soot and a singed habit, rather like someone trying to plug in a toaster mid-thunderstorm. Whether this actually happened or is simply monastic campfire lore remains uncertain, but the tale endures as evidence of the Church's willingness to flirt with the edges of the unknown. You wander toward a wooden lectern where tide tables are spread out like a seafaring menu. Northern ports relied on predictions based on lunar phases recorded by coastal monasteries, charts to tell sailors when the channel would be breast-high or ankle-deep, essential for safe crossings. Historians still argue whether these medieval tide tables were independently invented in English abbeys or adapted from ancient Roman guides imported via Arabic translations, but their utility is undeniable, better than guessing your way across a body of water and ending up on a sandy spit like a medieval castaway. The room vibrates with hushed conversations in Latin peppered with local dialects. One canon enthusiastically points out a peculiar notation in the margin, a shorthand symbol indicating a lunar eclipse that occurred in 810 AD, described as the moon swallowed by the sky's great wolf. This poetic flourish may be more fiction than observation, but it highlights how clerics blended empirical data with theological metaphor, interpreting celestial events as cosmic sermons. A soft chuckle escapes you when you notice an annotation on a horoscope chart warning against planting onions during a Mercury retrograde, an early example of astrology's practical crossover into agriculture. Some farmers believed that aligning sowing with planetary alignments would yield crops so robust they'd practically leap from the soil. Modern readers might scoff, but fringe or not, these practices shaped farming calendars for centuries. Your fingertips brush a vellum manuscript detailing the Church's involvement in developing mechanical clocks. By the 13th century, Cathedral towers across Europe sported weight-driven clocks with the verge escapements, ancestral grandfathers of your digital wristwatch. One famous example is the clock at Salisbury Cathedral, which rang bells to call monks to prayer at precise intervals, effectively serving as a communal Fitbit, nudging you toward spiritual steps. You inhale deeply, tasting the metallic tang of aged brass and candle soot. The echo of chanting drifts from a side chapel, blending with the rhythmic tick-tock of early clockwork, a comforting metronome that bridges the divine and the mechanical. It's almost lullaby-like, reminding you of bedtime noise machines, only older and less Bluetooth-enabled. Someone near the back claps a small hammer against a bronze bell to test its resonance, creating a sudden ping that startles a novice monk. He murmurs an apology, sheepishly adjusting his robe. You grin, thinking that academic missteps are timeless. Some things never change, like accidentally hitting reply all on a medieval correspondence list. Though superstition often accompanied these scientific pursuits, the Church fostered an environment where inquisitive minds could tinker. Monasteries compiled observational logs of comets, sunspots, and planetary conjunctions, gradually refining methods that would later underpin Renaissance astronomy. Historians still argue whether these efforts were driven by genuine intellectual curiosity or by the Church's pragmatic need to organize liturgical cycles. But the legacy is clear. Many modern universities trace their origins to cathedral schools where science and faith coexisted. As the morning light climbs higher, a senior cleric summons you to inspect a newly installed sundial outside. You emerge onto a sunlit courtyard ringed with cloisters. The sundial's gnomon casts a sharp shadow on inscribed hour markers, nature's clock face refined through centuries of ecclesiastical calibrations. A breeze carries the faint scent of rosemary from nearby herb gardens tended by the same monks who chart the heavens above. You realize that by mapping stars and measuring time, the Church laid the foundations for navigation, agriculture, and daily life. Without these early innovations, you'd still be guessing when to wake for prayers or planting crops, like trying to schedule your workday by the neighbor's rooster crow. Instead, these clerical astronomers turned cosmic chaos into a cosmic calendar, guiding human activity with surprising precision. As you step away, the cathedral bells begin their sonorous toll, each peal echoing through vaulted arches like a gentle heartbeat. You close your eyes, feeling the pulse of centuries-old ingenuity vibrating through the stones beneath your feet. The Church's role in early science wasn't a sideline act, it was a starring performance that shaped the rhythms of medieval life and set the stage for the scientific revolution to come. You drift from the cathedral, head still buzzing with astrolabe gears and water clocks, heart warmed by the knowledge that faith and observation once danced together under Gothic arches. And as you follow the cobbled path back toward the evening's shadowy streets, you carry with you a newfound appreciation for the clerics who charted the skies so that humanity might measure its own journey through time. You push open a heavy oak door into a cavernous library where the scent of aged leather and dust hangs thick in the air, like opening a time-worn treasure chest that's been sealed shut for centuries. Rows of chained books glint in torchlight, their covers cracked and faded, each tome tethered to its lectern like a reluctant pet begging to stay put. Your fingertips brush across the cold iron chains, and you feel the weight of knowledge both guarded and restricted. Here in this hallowed hall, the Church wears two very different hats, one as vigilant censor, severing dangerous ideas, and the other as devoted guardian, shielding ancient wisdom from oblivion. In 1559, Pope Paul IV's Index Librorum Prohibitorum officially listed books deemed heretical or scandalous, mandating that faithful Catholics burn offending works or face excommunication, a mainstream historical fact that echoes through the stacks like a forbidding whisper. Yet, centuries earlier, Cassiodorus founded the Vivarium in the 6th century, a monastic library dedicated to copying classical texts by Seneca, Cicero, and Virgil long before the index's shadow fell across Christendom. You meander between shelves as dim light glows on gilded spines, recalling the monastic scriptoria you visited, those tiny rooms of fervent copying. But here, irony drips like candle wax. The same institution that once commanded flames to devour banned writings also commissioned scribes to rescue pagan manuscripts from ruin. It's like a parent who grounds you for sneaking out, then secretly keeps your contraband comic books in a locked drawer. Historians still argue whether the Church's zeal for censorship stifled debate more than its libraries nurtured renewal, a debate as persistent as the echo of your footsteps in this vaulted sanctuary. A medieval librarian glides past your shoulder, murmuring in Latin about a recent papal bull condemning certain philosophical treatises. His robes whisper against the stone floor, and you catch a faint whiff of musty parchment mixed with a tang of iron from inkwells. He pauses at a shelf labeled Banned Texts, and you notice tiny warning symbols, flaming torches, scratched into the wood to alert unsuspecting readers. Someone has scrawled a fringe note beside one title: "If you read this in bed, beware of spontaneous levitation," which makes you grin at the idea of a scholar floating off his stool in mid-argument. Descending a narrow spiral staircase, you arrive in an underground vault where the most dangerous volumes are locked away under triple keys. The walls feel cool and damp like a crypt, with water dripping from unseen crevices into shallow stone basins. You lean in to examine an illuminated manuscript once attributed to Hypatia of Alexandria, a lost copy thought destroyed by zealots. Touching its cover sends a shiver up your spine, as if the ghosts of ancient philosophers linger in the margins. That single rescued volume survived centuries of war decay and doctrinal purges to whisper secrets across time. By contrast, other shelves hold classical authors whose ideas were never quelled. Pliny's natural histories, Ptolemy's geography, and Ovid's love poems in delicate verse, all recopied under church auspices. The paradox feels surreal. The same institution that forbade reading Erasmus without permission also funded translations of Euclid's Elements for cathedral schools. It's like banning Netflix, but subscribing to every streaming service for your kids. Confusing, but oddly effective. You run a finger along a row of vellum spines labeled Occult and Esoterica, and the hairs on your neck prick at the thought of arcane texts cloaked in demonology. Legend claims a certain abbot hid a grimoire of alchemical experiments within a hollowed-out gospel teaching novices to transform lead into ink for spiritual rewriting. Whether real or myth, the tale underscores how some scholars went to great lengths, burning incense to mask odor and wearing thieves' gloves to handle forbidden pages to preserve what authorities sought to suppress. A soft breeze wafts through a grated window high above, carrying the faint scent of rain on slate roofs. You recline on a wooden bench, the planks creaking under your weight, and contemplate the Library of Clermont, where Peter the Venerable in the 12th century commissioned translations of the Quran to better understand Islam. This bold scholarly move came amid calls to ban all Muslim texts, a mainstream fact that shows the Church sometimes chose study over suppression when strategic curiosity prevailed. As your eyes adjust to flickering lamplight, you spot a marginal doodle, a crowned frog perched atop a stack of books scribbled in the hand of a bored clerk. Some say these playful images helped monks remember which shelves held sacred versus secular works, an early form of color coding without the color. Historians still argue whether such doodles were sanctioned cataloging tools or mere jabs at clerical life, yet they bring a whimsical charm to the somber vault. Your attention drifts to a sealed chest labeled Heretical Chronicles. You imagine it containing lost gospels, proto-Protestant treatises, or even scientific essays by bold thinkers ahead of their time. A rumor persists that a copy of Copernicus's unpublished heliocentric manuscript once lay hidden here before the invention of the printing press made censorship a losing battle. The fringe rumor stains your imagination like spilled ink. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's monastic gossip spun over countless candlelit evenings. Leaning closer to the chained shelf, you rub your palms together, warming them against the cold metal. You recall that in some abbeys, librarians used invisible ink recipes, gum Arabic mixed with lemon juice, to transcribe banned passages in blank spaces, revealing them only when heat was applied. It's like medieval Easter egg hunting. Bring a candle, bake the parchment, and voila, a secret text emerges. Whether genuinely practiced or merely a fanciful story, this method captures the resourcefulness of scholars under duress. A creaking noise from the stairwell brings you back to the present. A novice groggy from late-night copying descends with a torch that sputters dangerously close to a loose tapestry. You wince. One stray spark could incinerate this vault in minutes, erasing centuries of recovery work. It's a stark reminder that preservation was a precarious gamble, with fire and fanaticism lurking at every turn. Without these guardians of ink and quill, Europe's intellectual heritage might have slipped entirely into oblivion. You rise from the bench, the floorboards groaning in protest, and stroll back up to the main hall, where barred windows frame a twilight sky tinged with lavender. The library doors loom behind you, merging the symbolism of openness and closure, a sanctuary of learning that simultaneously bars certain truths from view. It's a duality so profound, it feels like a whispered lullaby and a stern warning in the same breath. As you step out into the night air, the scent of rain-soaked cobblestones greets you. You carry with you the paradox of the Church's 1,000-year legacy, a force that wielded the fire of censorship, but also cradled the fragile embers of classical wisdom. Remember that monk who doodled dragons sipping tea, or the sneezing scribe who obliterated psalms. Such moments remind you that behind every act of suppression or salvation were human hands fumbling in flickering light. In this delicate dance between ban and beacon, the Church shaped the contours of Europe's intellectual landscape. And as you wander back through cloistered corridors, the echo of chains and the whisper of turning pages follow you like a memory you can't shake, proof that even in darkness, the quest for knowledge refuses to be silenced. You trudge through the mud-churned alleys of a makeshift crusader camp just outside Jerusalem's shattered walls, where the scent of spiced lamb roasting on skewers mingles with the acrid tang of sweat and rusted armor. Tattered banners flap in a hot breeze that carries distant calls to prayer from minarets and the occasional bray of a goat tethered to a spike. You're not here for battle, but for a different spoils of war, the exchange of ideas that flows in caravans as surely as silks and spices. In the aftermath of the First Crusade's 1099 capture of the Holy City, European knights and clerics found themselves face to face with the dazzling world of Islamic scholarship, frescoed madrasas, libraries, brimming with Arabic treatises, and bustling bazaars, hawking leather-bound volumes alongside mosaic tiles. Your fingers graze the rough hides of manuscripts carried from Cairo and Baghdad, their pages inscribed with intricate geometric patterns framing works by Avicenna on medicine and Al-Khwarizmi on algebra, mainstream fact you can't ignore. These texts, once hidden behind linguistic and cultural walls, now tempt Latin readers with knowledge of cures for jaundice and algorithms for calculating Qibla directions. You weave between camps of scribes who crouch beneath canvas awnings, quills poised over parchment, as translators, often Jewish scholars, fluent in both Arabic and Hebrew, render these exotic tomes into Latin. Their ink-stained robes resemble spilled ink maps, marking routes of enlightenment. One translator murmurs softly in your ear, 60 lines a day, or I starve his voice a gravelly whisper. Historians still argue whether this burst of translation in Toledo from the 1150s onward, owes more to Crusader spoils or to diplomatic ties between Aragon and Muslim Spain, but the result is undeniable. Greek philosophy resurfaces through Arabic lenses, reviving Aristotle like a phoenix rising from scriptoria ashes. Amid these earnest sessions, a fringe rumour drifts through the camp like a mischievous wind. Some say that during one translation marathon, a scribe accidentally baked saffron into his ink, turning the pages a rich gold hue and infusing each manuscript with a faint floral aroma. Readers later claimed the scent enhanced memory, recall, an early form of aromatherapy, if you will. Whether true or a fanciful campfire story is anyone's guess, but the notion of saffron-scented philosophy certainly adds a whimsical perfume to the dusty business of scholarship. You settle on a low stool beside a makeshift table heaped with scrolls, sweeping away a swirl of sand to accept a cup of sweet rose-water tea offered by a hospitable interpreter. The liquid cools your parched throat and tingles your senses as you flip through pages where Euclidean geometry diagrams nestle beside treatises on optics. It's as if you've stumbled into a medieval TED Talk where the speakers wear chainmail and the slides are vellum sheets held up against the sun. A clatter of hoofbeats announces the arrival of a Fatimid envoy bearing a curious gift, a leather satchel full of translated Indian astrological charts, their illustrations mapping constellations with vibrant colors that clash deliciously with the muted tones of Western manuscripts. You can almost taste the cinnamon-laced flatbread they bring alongside crisp at the edges, chewy in the center, each bite, reminding you that culinary and intellectual exchange often travel hand in hand. At dusk, a hush falls when a group of knights gathers around a lantern-bathed lectern as a cleric reads aloud from Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, describing the symptoms of plague with surgical precision. One knight, his breastplate scuffed from battle, furrows his brow so deeply you imagine brambles might sprout there. He asks, can such foreign healing rival our own leeching and bloodletting? The translator's soft chuckle ripples through the circle. You sip more rosewater, savoring the tension between tradition and innovation. Nearby, a boisterous troubadour tunes a lute and weaves a ballad about a knight who used alchemical mercury to polish his armor, an anecdote treated as comedic relief, but hinting at fringe scientific curiosity. Audience members sheepishly whisper, "He nearly poisoned himself," illustrating how experimental chemistry danced dangerously close to heresy and hazard alike. You wander toward a row of tents where illuminated diagrams, complete with marginal doodles of armored elephants, sipping tea, hang on cord lines, like exotic laundry, drying in the evening breeze. Those doodles, you learn, helped students retain complex Arabic grammar rules by associating each declension with a quirky beast. Historians still argue whether these mnemonic cartoons spread from North Africa or emerged independently in European translation centers. But either way, they reveal that learning thrived on visual puns as much as on philosophical texts. As campfires flare, you notice a caravan guard brushing sand off a compact astrolabe, lamenting that his version made by Syrian metalworkers tracks stars far more accurately than his grandfather's sundial back home. My father thought I was daft to trust an instrument made by infidels, he muses, tapping the brass disc affectionately. This admission feels like tasting forbidden fruit, faith and curiosity interwoven as tightly as the guard's leather gauntlet. Your senses reel at the juxtaposition, merchants selling fine Persian carpets alongside thieves fencing Crusader-looted icons, scribes copying treatises by lamplight while nearby screams echo from a makeshift gallows administering justice. Knowledge and violence mingle like oil and vinegar, and you can't decide which coats your tongue more memorably. Before the moon climbs high, you move toward a group of scholars comparing translations of Aristotle's Metaphysics. A Catalan monk protests that one phrase on being lost its nuance in translation. A Jewish translator retorts that any translation is an interpretation, and thus no meaning is ever pure. The debate spirals upward, voices growing more animated under the starlit sky, revealing that intellectual tensions run as deep as any battlefield trench. You slip away from the throng chest tight with excitement and a hint of homesickness for cloistered calm. Yet you carry fresh scrolls bound in leather emblazoned with seals that promise to unlock medical cures and mathematical proofs far beyond anything dreamed of in your hometown monastery. You clutch them close as if they were spoils of conquest, more precious than any sword or chalice. Before you depart the camp at dawn, you stand on a low hillock and gaze back at the flickering tents, feeling the soft pulse of history threading through the sands. The Crusades, often painted purely as wars of faith, also served as catalysts for an intellectual alchemy that would transform Europe's trajectory. As sunlight breaks over the horizon, you realize that this exchange, born of conflict and curiosity, sowed seeds that sprouted into universities, academies, and the eventual Renaissance. You pocket a fragment of translated Averroes, tasting the spicy tea lingering on your lips, and whisper a nod to that saffron ink legend. In this twilight between war and wisdom, you sense humanity's stubborn urge to share and learn, even amid clashing swords. And as you trudge back toward the west, your heart hums with anticipation for the ideas you'll carry home, vivid proof that knowledge, once unleashed, cannot be contained by walls or wills. You push open the heavy doors of the cathedral school just as morning light filters through towering lancet windows, dust motes, dancing in the shafts of gold like floating motes in a steampunk snow globe. The hush of polished stone corridors wraps around you, interrupted only by the hushed mutter of students debating beneath vaulted arches. This is the rise of scholastic thought, where faith and reason collide in candlelit debates that buzz louder than your neighbor's group chat on a sleepy Sunday morning. You sidle past rows of wooden desks engraved with graffiti, more elaborate than your last university whiteboard, crosses entwined with playful caricatures of Aristotle wearing a toga and roller skates. It's a fringe tidbit that makes you grin. Who knew the father of logic had such a flair for speed? Historians still argue whether these doodles were student satire or actual pedagogical aids to make dusty syllogisms stick in memory, but either way they set a lighter tone amid serious inquiry. At the lectern, a young canon in a cassock, adjusted with the precision of a barista pulling an espresso shot, reads aloud from Aristotle's Metaphysics, translating Greek into Latin with the finesse of a simultaneous interpreter at the UN. A mainstream fact you register: by the mid-12th century, Aristotle's works, long forgotten in the West, streamed into Europe via Arabic translations, sparking a revolution in medieval philosophy and theology. Without those translations, you'd still be arguing whether a chicken comes before an egg instead of whether substance precedes essence. You settle on a hard oak bench, no ergonomic cushions here, so adjust your posture like you're trying not to nod off during a never-ending webinar. The air smells of beeswax candles, stained parchment, and something vaguely like overcooked lentils from last night's refectory scraps. A low chant drifts from the adjacent chapel, mixing with the scratch of quills and the occasional cough that echoes like a misfired echo effect in an amateur podcast. Around you, pairs of students huddle in animated discussion. One recites Peter Abelard's logic puzzles, the other counters with Bernard of Chartres' view that we are like dwarfs perched on the shoulders of giants, an analogy that makes you imagine medieval students as literal dwarfs precariously balanced on chubby shoulders ready to topple at any moment. Minor laugh because image that in your next Zoom meeting. A canon gestures passionately, his robe swirling as he insists that divine truths must withstand the crucible of rational debate rather than smug assent alone. His interlocutor retorts by citing Augustine's skeptical musings, sparking a volley of arguments sharper than any crusader's sword. Scholasticism emerges here, rigorous dialectic that treats theology like a court case, evidence weighed before verdicts of faith. Historians still argue whether this method flowed directly from monastic scriptoria practices, or was a novel invention catalyzed by exposure to Arabic schools. But the outcome shines through centuries, the university system itself. You roam the back rows where marginalia bloom like medieval graffiti, art tiny knights jousting with inkwells, dragons curled around theological treatises, and one particularly elaborate sketch of a student face-palming at a thorny logical paradox. That doodle feels like a unifying meme across time. Some frustrations never change. Nearby, a scroll-toting scholar explains the controversial principle of analogia entis God knows all. By analogy, wrapping his gloved hands around the concept as if trying to juicy squeeze every nuance out of it. You nod along picturing a modern TED Talk where the speaker's slides flick by in rapid succession, except here, the slides are vellum sheets flipped by a clerk who's clearly over-caffeinated on mead. A fringe story drifts through the hall that sets your eyebrows alight. Rumor has it that a certain master secretly met students at midnight in the crypt to discuss banned commentaries on Averroes, passing annotated parchments in candlelit hush, so furtive that they risked excommunication for heresy. Whether this cloak and dagger scholarship actually happened, or is monastic gossip elevated to legend, it underscores how fervent the hunger for knowledge became, even when the stakes involved eternal damnation rather than a Facebook ban. You glance upward at the ribbed vaults adorned with geometric patterns, reminiscent of the very Alhambra tiles scholars brought back from Spain, a subtle nod to cross-cultural currents shaping Christian theology. A gentle sarcasm tugs at your lips. It's like rebranding your home decor with IKEA pieces from a rival's showroom. Less than 1% chance your grandma notices. But, you know, a bell tolls for the noon meal, and you follow throngs of students down narrow staircases hewn into the cathedral's foundations. The scent of pottage mingles with the metallic tang of heated iron from the forges below, where armorers craft the chainmail that occasionally doubles as seatbelt protection during particularly heated debates. One student quips, "If logic fails, at least I have plate armor," prompting soft laughter from the queue. Seated at long tables, you spoon up thick porridge perfumed with honey and raisins, good enough to make you reconsider your last grocery splurge on instant oatmeal. Conversation churns around you, whether a perfectly logical syllogism can prove the Trinity or if divine mysteries forever elude rational capture. These debates feel like philosophical escape rooms, minus the time limit and blinking lock icons, though the threat of being labeled a heretic looms larger than any exit door. After lunch, you return to the school for a public disputation, the medieval equivalent of a scholarly slam poetry night. Two masters square off at the lectern, one arguing that faith must follow reason, the other insisting that reason submits to faith. Their voices rise and fall in rhetorical crescendos, echoing off stone like a choral performance. You almost hum along, reveling in the symphony of intellect. A quirky footnote springs to mind. In some schools, students would wear colored hoods, indicating their allegiance: red for Aristotelians, blue for Augustinians, green for skeptics. It's as if they were rival football teams, complete with cheering sections and makeshift banners. Historians still argue whether these hood colors denoted official schools of thought or were informal markers tossed around by gossiping novices, but the mental image of medieval students chanting, "Go Aristotle," sticks with you. Your senses sharpen as Latin phrases fly quod erat demonstrandum via negativa prima causa. You feel the intellectual electricity crackle like static before a summer storm, tangible and exhilarating. For a moment, you imagine grabbing a smartphone and live streaming this scholarly showdown, complete with emoji reactions, raining down for every winning retort. As the dusk approaches, torchbearers light sconces along corridors lined with wooden boards displaying upcoming lecture topics on the human soul, on the motion of heaven, and intriguingly, on the proper use of peasant humor in theology. That last title makes you laugh out loud, earning curious glances from a nearby novice who mouths, "Seriously." You wander into a side chamber where a small group rehearses a quadribetal debate. Students pose any question under the sun to a master who must answer on the spot. This spontaneous mental gymnastics resembles improv comedy more than formal disputation, and you can't help but admire the bravery required. Imagine trying that in one of your work meetings. "Okay, boss, can you prove our KPI projections aren't a cosmic illusion?" As the final shadows lengthen, you step into the twilight air outside the cathedral school. The smell of damp stone and night-blooming jasmine drifts around you, blending with the distant toll of a curfew bell. You feel invigorated, as if you just drank a double shot of intellectual espresso. The spark of scholasticism forged in these vaulted halls will ripple forward, feeding the growth of universities and shaping the destiny of Europe's mind. You realize that this melding of faith and reason was neither simple worship nor purely cerebral. It was a dynamic workshop where ideas clashed, doodles flourished, and forbidden texts whispered from hidden alcoves. It laid the groundwork for a new era where questioning became as sacred as prayer, and the mind itself held divine promise. You step into a narrow torch-lit corridor beneath the cathedral, whose stones drip with moisture and mystery, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and aged timber. A low, hollow echo follows your footsteps, each slap of leather against flagstone sounding like a warning bell tolling in your chest. You're entering the realm of theological tribunals, where faith meets fear, and every whispered question could trigger a summons that carries more weight than your phone when it plunges to zero battery. Here, inquisitors in black robes pore over parchment scrolls and handwritten confessions with the solemn intensity of algorithms scanning your internet history for problematic keywords. By 1231 AD, Pope Gregory IX formalized the Papal Inquisition to root out heresy with standardized procedures, replacing haphazard local persecutions with a centralized tribunal, an official move that reshaped religious oversight across Europe mainstream fact. You shiver as you imagine being judged by this ecclesiastical court, where plea bargains meant public penance and doctrinal correction rather than Netflix apology tours. A wooden door groans open to reveal a dimly lit chamber lined with austere benches and a raised dais where stern-eyed theologians sit behind oaken desks. You slide onto a bench, wincing at the splintered wood, and listen as the presiding inquisitor reads from a lengthy list of prohibited beliefs, anything from advocating unlicensed vernacular preaching to suggesting the earth might orbit the sun. The crisp crackle of parchment complements the inquisitor's meter-long sermon, each word punctuated by the soft drip of water seeping through the ceiling, reminding you that inquisition chambers doubled as early escape rooms only, without the hidden clues or promise of bragging rights on social media. Despite its grim reputation, the tribunal system also clarified the boundaries of acceptable thought, channeling theological debate into formalized arenas. Historians still argue whether the Inquisition stifled intellectual progress more than it enforced doctrinal clarity. But there's no denying that setting rules, no matter how harsh, offered a kind of consistency you'd sorely miss when your favorite forum suddenly shutters for community guidelines violations. A sudden sneeze echoes through the hall as a novice copyist nearly flings a scroll into the inquisitor's lap. The resulting awkward silence feels like a medieval YouTube demonetization, one false move and you lose your privileges. You stifle a giggle at the image of a monk blinking back tears of fear, then swiftly offer a silent prayer that no one catches your amusement. On a nearby bench, you spot a quirky, marginal note scribbled in the hands of a penitent. He who argues with the Holy Office must also argue with his bladder, no breaks allowed. You grin, picturing the poor soul balancing bodily functions against doctrinal defense, a pressure that could rival any modern coding marathon without bathroom pauses. As the session progresses, a hooded figure is led forward, shackles clinking like a harsh tambourine beat. He's accused of improper metaphysics, allegedly claiming that angels might have free will like humans. The Inquisitor's quill hovers over a parchment, ready to condemn this frog-marcher of celestial logic. You feel the chill of the chamber seeping into your bones as you wonder if you'd have the nerve to propose a speculative theology. In this environment, your heart pounds louder than a viral drumbeat on TikTok. Between testimonies, you lean against the cool stone wall, noting a hidden alcove where inquisitors kept a collection of interrogation tools. Iron chairs rumored to tighten with candle heat, and wooden pins shaped like question marks for maximum psychological effect. Whether these devices truly existed or sprang from prisoners' fevered imaginations remains uncertain, but such fringe tales circulate like medieval clickbait, captivating listeners around hearths with morbid delight. You inhale the musty air, tasting the metallic tang of ink mixed with sweat and candle soot. The Inquisitor's voice softens as he outlines beneficial correctional practices, promising that those who confess will avoid public torture and instead wear conspicuous crosses. For a penitential year, imagine wearing your browser history on your sleeve for a full rotation of seasons. The crowd murmurs assent, relieved that mercy still flickers even in such a forbidding place. A debate erupts at the back. One theologian insists that inquisitorial procedure elevates truth by exposing error. Another counters that fear-driven conformity breeds hypocrisy, not genuine belief. These arguments ricochet like theological tennis, punctuated by scribes grinding quills to signal a new point. Historians still argue whether this culture of confession advanced orthodoxy or merely drove dissent underground, but you marvel at the paradox. A system designed to crush heresy also catalogued and refined the very doctrines it protected. Your eyes drift to a wooden chest stamped with intricate crosses. It holds records of every trial, meticulous logs of accusations, verdicts, and penances. The level of bureaucratic detail rivals any modern compliance department's audit trails. You imagine cross-referencing entries to find out who first questioned transubstantiation and whether that path led to enlightenment or an early VIP spot at the stake. A flick of your wrist brushes against a loose flagstone, and a faint breeze rattles up your sleeves. A small scroll slips from the Inquisitor's desk, landing at your feet like an unwanted notification. Silver ink lettering reveals a rumor an inquisitor once pardoned a heretic for having exceptional artistic talent, commissioning him to illuminate official decrees, proof that even the sternest tribunals craved a touch of aesthetic flair. The story feels like finding out a system admin secretly codes, in pixel art, unexpected artistry amid rigid oversight. As afternoon light dims into lantern glow, a procession files into the chamber. Headfirst penitents bound for public penance. You follow them outside where the chilly air stings your lungs, tasting of damp earth and expectant silence. Townsfolk gather to witness the ritual. You shake your head at the sight of a scholar clutching a rope noose in one hand and a Bible in the other. A dramatic tableau that would trend on every history channel had smartphones existed. An inquisitor strides past his robe, trailing behind him like a dark cloud. He pauses to adjust a candle holder and sniffs as though annoyed by the stench of incense gone stale. You catch his expression, a fleeting flicker of doubt, as if he wonders whether the fervor of his crusade against heresy truly serves justice or feeds a hunger for control. It's the kind of moment you'd capture in a slow-motion replay, adding heartbeat sound effects for maximum dramatic effect. A local apothecary wanders through the crowd offering calming potions brewed from lavender and Valerie Paddington root, an early equivalent of anxiety tea for condemned theologians. You accept a cup inhaling the floral aroma that offers a momentary reprieve from the day's tension. It's a fringe remedy said to soothe the mind before confession, though some claim it inspired delusional visions of flying monks. Either way, the break feels like sipping chamomile before a nerve-wracking presentation. As dusk settles and torches gutter in quiet courtyards, you reflect on the Inquisition's paradox. An institution that struck fear into hearts also demanded rigorous record-keeping legal procedure and defined creed with unprecedented precision. Without such codification, Europe's religious landscape might resemble a chaotic comment section, endless debate with no guidelines where trolls masquerade as truth seekers. Instead, inquisitorial boundaries, however draconian, carved a backdrop against which orthodoxy and eventually reform movements could crystallize. You slip away through an archway into the cool night, the echo of chains and whispered confessions fading behind you. A few stars sparkle overhead, indifferent witnesses to humanity's mercurial dance between doubt and dogma. As you follow moonlit paths back toward the safety of your own era's more forgiving forums, you carry with you the lesson that sometimes clarifying where the line is drawn can be as powerful and as chilling as the threat of crossing it. You step into a courtyard bathed in lavender dusk, where herbs spill from raised beds in ordered rows. Sage, chamomile, and feverfew release their perfume into the cool evening air like whispered incantations. The hum of bees fades as the sun sinks, casting long shadows across a modest stone building whose wooden door bears the faint image of a cross and a red circle, the universal sign of sanctuary. This is a medieval monastic infirmary, equal parts hospital, hospice, and healing school, and tonight it's your refuge from the doctrinal fires of the Inquisition. Inside the space pulses with a quiet rhythm. Wool-draped cots line the walls, occupied by groaning patients wrapped in linen bandages that reek of vinegar and rosemary. A sister in a wimple so tight it could double as a neck brace moves gracefully between them, her arms laden with clay jars and linen poultices. She leans over a moaning man, murmurs a Latin prayer, and gently applies a mustard plaster to his chest. You watch, struck by the fusion of faith and care. Healing here is a sacred act. This is where the Church shines in a different light, not as a censor or judge, but as caregiver. By the 12th century, monastic hospitals like those at Cluny Monte Cassino and St. Gall had become some of the most advanced centers for healing in Europe, preserving Greco-Roman medical texts while experimenting with herbs, surgeries, and isolation techniques long before germ theory existed mainstream fact. You kneel beside a low shelf where jars of dried nettles, comfrey, and horehound are labeled in neat Carolingian script. A monk with ink-stained fingers explains how comfrey roots are used to set broken bones, boiled, mashed, and wrapped in linen to coax the body back into shape. It's basically medieval duct tape. He chuckles softly, then offers you a honey-sweetened brew for nervous disquiet, adding that it also works wonders for monks about to recite Latin in front of bishops. You sip it, tastes like wet hay and burnt sugar, but you feel oddly calmer. Fringe rumors bloom like mold on soft cheese in these places. One whispered tale tells of a nun who allegedly revived a plague-stricken boy using nothing but garlic poultices, Gregorian chants, and a well-timed slap. Some say she later vanished into the forest and lived among foxes dispensing herbal wisdom to travelers who swore they saw her eyes glowing in the dark. Whether she was a saint, a charlatan, or an early mycologist remains up for debate, but her story lives in the margins of dusty herbals. You trail a young monk as he lifts a copper basin from the fire. He pours steaming water into a wooden tub for a patient suffering from melancholy. Warm baths, he explains, are prescribed for black bile, along with cheerful conversation and fresh air. He gestures to a patient being walked in circles around a cloister garden flanked by singing novices. The whole thing feels like a wellness retreat, curated by Gregorian influencers, #blessed by Benedict. Across the room, another brother reads from a tattered copy of Galen's On the Natural Faculties, pausing to annotate passages in Latin shorthand. He explains that Galen's 4 humor theory, blood phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, still dominates medical practice. Your modern brain winces picturing someone being prescribed leech therapy for a case of heartbreak. Yet within this strange framework, medieval healers developed astonishingly sophisticated treatments: honey to disinfect wounds, willow bark for pain, and lavender for sleep. Historians still argue whether these successes stemmed from inherited Roman techniques or local innovation. But either way, the results were often better than nothing. You lean over to study a wax tablet recording patient diagnoses. One entry reads, "Brother Thomas, afflicted by spiritual vertigo, prescribed 2 days of silence and fig compote." It's hard not to smile. You imagine that's the medieval version of taking a mental health day and binging figgy snacks instead of Netflix. Another entry lists phantom humors in the feet cured by placing feet in salt and singing Psalm 23 backward. You resist the urge to try it yourself just for the ASMR potential. In the apothecary's alcove shelves, buckle under ceramic jars labeled in red ink, powdered wormwood, calcined oyster shell, distilled dew. A mortar and pestle sits beside a bowl of crushed saffron, a luxury so rare it could buy a horse used to treat fever and perhaps to add a little color flair to otherwise beige porridge. You watch as a sister carefully adds a pinch to a broth, murmuring that bright color lifts the soul, especially when the body aches. You nod its color psychology medieval style. One quirky detail catches your eye, a chart pinned to the wall outlining optimal urinal hues, drawn like a painter's palette. Pale gold balance, bright yellow excess bile, brown devil's mischief. You raise an eyebrow and glance toward a nearby chamber pot, wondering if medieval physicians were the original color analysts. Historians still argue whether such charts were legitimate diagnostic tools or humorous side projects meant to train novices' observational skills. But you can't deny the creativity. Toward the back you discover a darkened room reserved for isolation, a rudimentary quarantine ward. A carved inscription above the threshold reads, "Here we hope, if not heal." Inside, patients lie beneath rough blankets, attended by masked nuns who wear beaked hoods stuffed with herbs to purify the air, a chilling but innovative precursor to modern PPE. The scent is overpowering, cloves, myrrh, and something like vinegar and mint. You hold your breath and step carefully, feeling both reverence and dread. A friar in the corner sits beside a dying man, holding his hand and reading softly from the book of Job. There is no fanfare here, no rituals of power, only presence. In these final moments, healing is less about cure and more about accompaniment. The scene presses into your chest like a warm stone, grounding you in a truth as old as time. Compassion often matters more than theory. As night deepens, candles flicker against plaster walls, and the murmurs of the infirmary soften to snores, prayers, and the rhythmic scrape of a mortar grinding midnight medicine. You find a bench by the garden-facing window and listen to the night insects humming a lullaby over the herbs. Outside, the moon bathes the monastery in silver light, illuminating the quiet revolution of hands that heal with rosemary honey and sacred song. This too was the church, not just crusades and councils, but hands wiping fevered brows, voices praying over broken bodies and minds, recording observations that would one day evolve into medicine. You realize that even when dogma ruled the pulpit, mercy ruled the sick room. And as your own eyelids grow heavy, you understand that while progress in theory may have stuttered, healing in practice carried on, rooted in ritual kindness and trial and error recipes that oddly enough still echo through your modern medicine cabinet. You stand at the base of a massive stone facade, craning your neck until the spires vanish into the sky. The weight of the cathedral looms above you, not just in stone and stained glass, but in audacity. This isn't merely a church. It's an announcement, a monument that screams, "We have conquered height, light, and time." Welcome to the era of Gothic cathedrals where theology met engineering and the impossible became breathtakingly real. Inside your footsteps echo across the cool, smooth nave, the silence so vast it seems to swallow your breath. Pillars stretch like forest trunks toward ribbed vaults and colored light rains down through rose windows in a kaleidoscope of blues, reds, and golds. You pause mid-stride, mesmerized, as sunlight catches a shard of glass shaped like Saint Michael, his wings rimmed in fire, his face serene. The craftsmanship is so fine it could give modern laser cutting a run for its money. Here you begin to grasp a truth seldom told outside dusty textbooks. These cathedrals were not just spiritual sanctuaries, but centers of innovation. They were the skyscrapers of the Middle Ages, and they were made possible almost entirely under church patronage, and not just financial support, but intellectual collaboration. A mainstream historical fact you now see in every flying buttress and pointed arch. The church sponsored an engineering revolution that redefined what architecture could be. Beneath the stone ribbing you stumble upon a cluster of workmen muttering over parchment blueprints drawn with charcoal and goose quill. The master mason, his hands thick and chalk-stained, traces an arc on the plan, a catenary curve designed to redistribute pressure from the nave to the outer buttresses. He's explaining to a young apprentice how weight flows like water. It's structural physics. In 1287, you get closer only to catch a whiff of warm pitch and crushed limestone. The builders smear mortar with the grace of pastry chefs, coaxing massive stones into delicate balance. A fringe tidbit catches your ear. They say one cathedral incorporated crushed bones into the mortar, donated relics from the dead to bless the foundation. Whether it added structural integrity or ghostly protection, nobody's really sure. Historians still argue whether such additions were symbolic or seriously believed to offer divine reinforcement. Either way, it makes for a very spooky brick recipe. Higher up stonecutters dangle on primitive scaffolds, chiseling grotesques. Stone creatures, not merely decorative, but cleverly disguised waterspouts that redirect rain away from the structure. One gargoyle looks suspiciously like a local bishop with exaggerated ears and a perpetually surprised expression. You stifle a laugh. The stonemasons had opinions and weren't above immortalizing them in architecture. At the far end of the transept, a group of clerics stands in solemn debate beside a wooden model of the cathedral. One gestures to the central spire, questioning its proportions, while another suggests carving stories from Genesis into the tympanum above the door images for the illiterate to read with their eyes. Gothic cathedrals were multimedia classrooms before screens existed. You pass under the choir screen where delicate tracery weaves like frozen lace. Every flourish, every sculpted vine is an echo of Genesis, Psalms, and Revelation spun into stone and light. One brother chuckles as he polishes a marble pillar and tells you about the hidden owl, a tiny carving placed by a stonemason to prove his handiwork invisible unless the light hits it just right. It's a medieval Easter egg, centuries before coders began hiding their names in source code. Down in the crypt you find scaffolding supporting new additions. This cathedral, like many others, has been under construction for decades. Some even took centuries. Generations of masons, glaziers, and carpenters passed their skills down as guild secrets. The continuity is astounding. You meet a man whose grandfather carved the lintels and whose son will someday finish the West Tower. Progress here is measured not in weeks but in lifetimes. Historians still argue whether the true genius of Gothic architecture lay in its engineering or its symbolic ambition. But when you look up at those impossibly thin walls and impossibly tall windows, it's hard to separate the two. The physical elevation mirrors the spiritual one. It's not just about reaching God, it's about proving humans can make the leap. You climb narrow spiral stairs, each step worn into a curve by thousands of feet. When you reach the belfry, the city below spreads like a medieval circuit board. Markets, rivers, bridges, all radiating from the church-like data from a server hub. From up here, it's easy to see how the church wasn't just a spiritual force, it was the logistical center of medieval life. The cathedral controlled not just worship, but commerce, education, justice, and even the weather, or at least the prayers to fix it. You duck into a side room where artisans are assembling new panes of stained glass. Shards of ruby and cobalt scatter across a work table, arranged into scenes of saints battling demons, farmers ploughing fields, and scholars seated at lecterns. One artisan lets you hold a red glass disc up to the light. The glow turns your palm crimson, as if your blood has turned to light. This one took 6 weeks to fire, he says. You break it, and I'll make you eat sand. As the bell tower tolls vespers, a deep vibration hums through your bones. It's not just sound, it's architecture singing. You pause on the cathedral's roof, wind tousling your hair, and look across the buttressed maze of stone and sky. You think about what it took to build this, the mathematics, the trial and error, the courage to defy gravity, using only rope, sweat, and prayer. Down below, peasants shuffle toward the doors, their wool cloaks soaked from recent rain. They don't know the physics behind the arches or the names of the engineers who dreamed up the windows. But they feel it, the immensity of it all. That this place is more than a building. It's a testimony, not to how small humans are, but to how high they can reach. And you centuries later still feel it too. The light that filters through those windows isn't just sunlight. It's history, refracted and offered back to you, one glowing pane at a time. You walk away slowly, the echo of your footsteps swallowed by stone, the bell still resonating deep in your chest. Tonight it won't be hard to fall asleep, because even in an age many call dark, someone looked up at the sky and said, "Let's build toward it." You step through the arched doorway of a modest stone building tucked beside a bustling cathedral, the sign above its entry carved simply, "Studium Generale." There's no grandeur here, no towering spires or jeweled windows, just a quiet buzz of voices and the low clatter of books onto wooden desks. This is the birth of the university, and though it lacks spectacle, it hums with something even more potent, organized, thought-structured inquiry, and the slow, deliberate unraveling of ignorance. Inside, the air smells of ink tallow and sweaty wool cloaks left too long in cramped quarters. Students, young, mostly male, with patchy beards and hopeful eyes, hunch over the thick volumes chained to desks. A few mutter Latin phrases to themselves, like medieval affirmations. Cogito ergo sum fiat lux, in principio erat verbum. These cathedral-adjacent institutions, first sprouted in the 12th century in Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, mainstream fact alert, and would eventually form the bedrock of modern academia. You slip onto a hard bench beside a group mid-lecture. The professor or magister stands at a raised pulpit, his robe fluttering slightly as he recites a passage from Gratian's Decretum, a foundational legal text. He pauses, lets the silence settle, then poses a question. Can civil law ever override divine law? A murmur ripples through the students like wind through barley. You recognize this format: question, argument, counter-argument, rebuttal, a method called disputatio, the backbone of scholastic learning. The professor's voice is gravelly, but measured a cadence you could drift off to if the content weren't so fascinating. He's dissecting canon law like a surgeon with a scalpel referencing Aristotle, Cicero, and the Gospel of Matthew in one breath. You lean in intrigued as he draws parallels between divine justice and Roman contract law, like some theological episode of Law and Order Holy Intentions Unit. Beside you, a student's wax tablet is a mess of notes, doodles, and shorthand symbols. A tiny sketch of a pope riding a donkey adorns one margin. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Helps me remember which passage condemns papal excess. You smirk. Historians still argue whether these early universities encouraged radical critique or simply trained elite clergy, but clearly there was room for sly irreverence. A fringe detail catches your attention. A rumor circulates that at the University of Paris, a student once debated so ferociously about transubstantiation that his tongue went numb for a week. Some blamed divine punishment. Others, less dramatically, blamed too much cheap wine and not enough water. Either way, the tale lives on in footnotes and firelit taverns, a medieval caution against talking too much in theology class. You follow a narrow stairwell to a cramped dormitory where straw mattresses line the floor and cloaks double as blankets. Students live cheek by jowl here, often rising before dawn for lectures and sleeping with wax candles clutched like emotional support candles. The scent of unwashed socks and philosophical ambition lingers in the air. One student snores beneath a scroll of Galen's medical texts, drooling slightly. You tiptoe past him like he's guarding a sacred relic. In the scriptorium next door, hired scribes churn out copies of textbooks by hand, some for rent, others for sale. You overhear a student bargaining for a used volume of Boethius. He winces when the scribe quotes, "A price that's half my winter bread budget." You smile, some things never change. It's comforting to know students have always been broke and bartering even for metaphysics. Outside the courtyard buzzes with students preparing for oral exams. They pace in circles, reciting aloud like Gregorian beat poets. The soul is immaterial. The soul is immaterial. You imagine someone whispering, "The soul is late for class," and chuckle. Professors grill students in public, tossing questions like hot coals and expecting polished Latin replies. If you stammer or contradict Augustine, you fail. It's like Jeopardy with eternal consequences. One student wears a black hood embroidered with the gold trim symbol of a baccalaureus, someone who's completed initial studies. He's aiming for a licentia docendi, a license to teach. Yes, even then the church regulated who could and couldn't call themselves professor. Historians still argue whether this system was purely gatekeeping or genuine quality control, but the fact remains academia began as a priesthood of sorts. You wander toward the refectory where students sip thin broth and chew rye bread, with a grim focus of people calculating how long until the next festival. The clatter of spoons blends with the debate about Aristotelian motion and the ethics of charging for confession. Overheard snippets include, "If God exists outside time, can he also be in class on time? And did Aquinas plagiarize Augustine or just think really similarly?" You sit, eat, and realize this isn't just a school. It's a living forum, a monastic Reddit board come to life, minus the upvotes. A professor joins your table and shares a quirky anecdote. One student proposed that angels occupy no space, and therefore could all fit on the head of a pin. The professor nods solemnly. He failed, but his question became legend. You suppress a laugh, so that's where the famous phrase comes from. You'll never look at a sewing kit the same way again. In the chapel, students gather for evening prayers. Some participate with sincere devotion. Others mouth the words with the energy of someone watching the final credits of a 3-hour documentary. But the balance between intellect and piety is deliberate. This is the church's university after all, and no one escapes without a semester or a lifetime of theology. You take a final walk around the perimeter as the bells toll compline. In the fading twilight, you notice something remarkable. Despite the dust, the hunger, and the rigid structure, the university feels alive. There's laughter behind curtained windows, light flickering under doorframes, and that special electricity of people learning not just facts, but how to think. As you walk away beneath a sky pricked with stars, you feel the weight of what began here: degrees, disciplines, and debate. Universities were born under church roofs, midwifed by monks and shaped by men who saw no conflict between scripture and scholarship. They were messy, flawed, and deeply human, but they made the world think harder and deeper. And if you've ever pulled an all-nighter to meet a deadline, sat through a lecture on ethics, while questioning your own, or wandered a campus, wondering what any of it means, well, you've already walked these same worn stone paths in different shoes. You duck through the narrow doorway of a workshop, just off the main square, the scent of fresh ink and scorched vellum thick in the air. The place buzzes like a beehive, apprentices rushing about with smudged hands, wooden trays clattering, and someone shouting over the din. More lead, we need more lead. You've entered the world of early printing, and what once trickled through scriptoria in single copies now floods Europe in multiples, thanks to a man named Gutenberg, a machine called the printing press, and a church that both blessed and bristled at the chaos it unleashed. At the center of the room stands the press itself, hulking and mechanical, like a medieval transformer. Blocks of movable type glint under torchlight, carefully arranged into rows of Latin text. Ink rollers hang from hooks, and thick parchment sheets wait to be pressed into permanence. It's all beautifully chaotic, like watching a live concert where the sheet music is still being written between chords. You lean over the shoulders of an apprentice aligning the letters for a page of the Psalterium Romanum, one of the first books printed with red and black ink. His tongue sticks out slightly as he adjusts the spacing. "This one's for the bishop," he says, wiping his brow. He wants 200 copies by Michaelmas. You raise your eyebrows before the press that would have taken a scriptorium an entire year. Now, a few weeks, maybe. The mainstream historical fact hits you with a clang. Between 1450 and 1500, more than 20 million books rolled off presses across Europe, and most of them religious texts, Bibles, psalters, commentaries, sermons. The church, often blamed for clinging to the past, was actually the largest client of this new technology. And yet, the very same tool that spread God's word would soon spread the seeds of revolution. You pick up a freshly printed page and feel the still tacky ink under your fingers. The letters are crisp, uniform, beautiful in their precision. There's a tiny smudge on the bottom corner, and the apprentice groans. "That's going to the back of the stack," he mutters. You smile. It's the 15th century version of a typo. Historians still argue whether the church fully grasped the power of the press in those early years, or simply saw it as a faster way to distribute doctrine. Either way, once Pandora's press was opened, there was no stuffing the pages back in. A friar enters the room carrying a stack of handwritten pamphlets. "Convert these," he says, but change the phrasing. The bishop doesn't like the word compulsion. You watch as the scribe edits the text with a small chisel, chipping away at the metal type, like a sculptor making theological micro-adjustments. It hits you early. Printing wasn't just about copying, it was about controlling the message. Still, control only goes so far. A fringe tidbit floats into your ear from an elderly typesetter near the back. Once a prankster printed a page of the Book of Psalms, with every instance of mercy replaced by money. The bishop nearly fainted, but local merchants laughed for days. Whether the story is true or just press room gossip, it speaks to a growing truth. Printing meant anyone with a few blocks of type and a rebel's heart could spread an idea. You climb a set of creaky stairs to a quieter space where stacks of finished volumes rest in wooden cubbies. A young nun catalogues them, humming softly as she works. "We'll ship these to the convent in Poitiers," she tells you. "They've been copying Bibles by hand since the plague. You nod, struck by the idea of monks and nuns passing the torch, not with quills, but with presses now. The church didn't abandon the old ways overnight. It absorbed them one printed page at a time. Near the window, a scholar pores over a printed copy of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, fingers tracing each sentence as if he is checking for spiritual typos. The margin is filled with notes, ink blots where questions bubble. Can this be reconciled with Augustine? Check Hebrew source. You realize that printing didn't stop interpretation. It multiplied it. Each copy became a battleground of ideas, every reader a potential rebel or reformer. Downstairs again, the apprentices now whisper about something they've heard from Germany, a man named Luther hammering a list of complaints on a church door and printing pamphlets faster than bishops can ban them. You feel the tremor in the floorboards, the shift in the air. The printing press, once the church's mighty mouthpiece, is starting to talk back. Historians still argue whether the church's initial embrace of printing was a masterstroke of modernization or a fatal miscalculation. You can see both sides. On one hand, it allowed the Mass to be standardized, catechisms to be taught, and errors in Scripture to be corrected across regions. On the other, it meant Bibles in the hands of lay people, interpretations outside the pulpit, and eventually a world in which the priest no longer mediated every word from God's lips to yours. A man stumbles in waving a tract printed in basil. The Pope's crown weighs more than the cross. The printer shushes him. "That one's not ours," he says, eyes darting to the door. You feel the tension ripple. Truth, it seems, is now a matter of addition. You step outside as the press hammers on behind you, echoing like a heartbeat into the evening. The scent of ink lingers on your fingers, along with the weight of something bigger than paper. You realize that the printing press didn't just speed up communication, it democratized it. And the church, for better or worse, was right at the center of that revolution. As night falls and stars prick the dark like tiny illuminated capitals, you think of the press still clunking away even as the world it prints begins to splinter. The very force that promised unity through literacy also made space for doubt, divergence, and defiance. But isn't that the double-edged ink of all great ideas? You head off down the cobbled street, your mind buzzing like the press pages fluttering through your thoughts. Somewhere a new manuscript is being set. Somewhere else a heretic is reading it out loud. And somewhere deep in the vaults of a cathedral, a bishop is wondering if progress is a blessing or a betrayal. You stand beneath a vaulted ceiling in a sun-drenched chamber somewhere in Florence, where dust swirls in golden shafts and the scent of drying oil paint clings to the air. This is not a church. Not exactly. It's a private chapel turned studio, funded by a bishop's cousin and painted by a man who speaks more Latin than most priests. You're in the middle of something new, a quiet storm called the Renaissance, and the church, ever entwined in power and beauty, is both patron and participant. Everywhere you look, you see holy faces, but their eyes are suspiciously human. The Virgin's cheeks are flushed like she just caught her breath. St. John looks like he could elbow you in a tavern, and Christ, he's staring directly at you, not from a golden haloed void, but from a dusty road outside Florence. This is sacred art, but it bleeds realism. It's as if heaven got tired of being abstract and decided to rent a room in Tuscany. A mainstream fact, you note instantly it was the church, especially the wealthier northern Italian orders and Vatican elites who funded much of this revival. Pope Julius II commissioned Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling, the Medici backed Botticelli and Donatello, and cardinals competed over who could hire the most cutting-edge thinkers and painters. You feel like you're walking through an elite divine Pinterest board curated by men in mitres. You move closer to a fresco of St. Jerome in his study, noting the detailed books on the shelf, the lion napping at his feet, and the way the light filters through the window, casting naturalistic shadows that would have shocked earlier icon painters. The artist's signature is tucked into the folds of Jerome's robes, like a sly nod. Historians still argue whether the Church consciously fueled the Renaissance to display piety, or whether it simply couldn't resist showing off, but whatever the motive, the result was breathtaking. In the adjoining hallway, a young man reads aloud from a Latin manuscript, a translation of Plato, just printed in Venice. You stop startled. Plato? In a bishop's library? Yes, that's Marsilio Ficino's doing. A church-funded scholar, he translated ancient Greek philosophy into Latin, launching an intellectual wave that fused Christian theology with pagan thought. It's like discovering your priest also DJs techno remixes of Homer. It shouldn't work, but somehow it's transcendent. You pass a table where scholars argue gently over wine and figs. One quotes Augustine, another quotes Seneca. The third smiles and says, "Why not both?" Their robes still carry the scent of incense, but their eyes burn with the fire of curiosity. These aren't men trapped by dogma. They're playing with it, molding it, coloring outside the lines with charcoal and ink. You feel a little buzz of rebellious joy. There's a fringe rumor floating around the city that Leonardo da Vinci once sketched a crucifixion so realistic it made a cardinal faint. Not because of the gore, but because Christ's muscles were too perfect. It looked like Hercules, the story goes. Some claim Leonardo had to repaint the stomach. Whether it's true or not, the tension between devotion and aesthetics was real. The Church wanted beauty, but not too much humanity. Historians still argue whether this balance helped shape modern religious art or simply disguised theology behind a prettier mask. You step into a library where the shelves curve like the inside of a snail's shell, and every volume smells of ink and ambition. Humanist scholars, many of them monks in plain robes, pore over Cicero, Lucretius and Petrarch. You catch phrases that once would have triggered charges of heresy being dissected like sermon notes. The soul is noble, one reads aloud, because it questions everything. You realize something profound. The Renaissance wasn't about rejecting religion. It was about expanding the canvas. On a nearby desk, a monk artist is sketching the Vitruvian Man. Arms, outstretched feet, splayed circles and squares overlapping like cosmic diagrams. God made man in his image, he murmurs. But now we are trying to measure that image. His tone isn't defiant, it's reverent. The Church of this era didn't slam the door on reason. It invited it inside, gave it a glass of wine and asked it to paint the ceiling. Outside in the square you stumble upon a procession, priests swinging censers, chanting psalms. But instead of golden relics they carry scrolls, philosophical treatises, anatomical diagrams, translations of Archimedes. People bow as they pass. The sacred and the scholarly march together side by side. It's surreal, it's sacred. And it is only possible in this unique moment when the Church became not just the guardian of the soul, but the muse of the mind. Of course, not everyone approved. Savonarola, remember him, famously called Renaissance art vanity, condemning nude statues and pagan-themed frescoes. He organized a bonfire of the vanities in 1497, torching books, mirrors, and artworks considered impure. Some say Botticelli himself tossed a few of his paintings into the flames. Historians still argue whether the Church's relationship with the Renaissance was ever stable, or if it was always a dance on a knife's edge, one misstep from blaze or glory. As you wander into a candlelit study where a Jesuit mathematician calculates planetary positions beside a crucifix, it hits you. The Renaissance wasn't a rejection of God, it was a deeper reach toward him, not just in cathedrals and sacraments, but in anatomy, geometry, astronomy, music. It was belief with wider eyes, faith that dared to look through a telescope, and the Church, flawed, glorious, conflicted, was there commissioning, curating, sometimes condemning, but always involved. It was both patron and critic. It wanted to guide the soul and understand the body. It wanted stained glass and star charts. It wanted truth, but it wasn't always sure how much of it could handle. As dusk falls and torches are lit across the city, You step out into a Renaissance street, alive with light and voices. Above you, painted saints seem to lean from walls and whisper, "Learn, draw, write, build, ask." You realize that even in the church's most tangled chapters, it never fully silenced wonder. You walk through a world reborn not despite faith, but through it. And as the bells toll across Florence, echoing from domes, designed by men with both compasses and rosaries, you feel that curious blend of awe and calm the moment when you understand that history, like art, is never just black and white. You wake to the echo of hammering not from stonemasons or scribes, but from the sound of a fist on a wooden church door. The year is 1517. You've crossed a threshold. No more quiet debates in shadowy chapels or philosophical whispers in Florentine salons. Now the voices are loud. Now the questions have teeth. The Reformation has arrived, and it doesn't knock politely, it kicks the door wide open. The air smells of ink and bonfire ash. Pamphlets flutter in the wind, like paper birds with burning feathers. You pick one up, the pages still warm, the words biting. The Pope is not God. The Church is not infallible, and salvation is not for sale. Martin Luther's 95 Theses are everywhere on walls, on wagons, even scribbled in the margins of Bibles. And for the first time in 1,000 years, ordinary people are reading scripture in their own language. You duck into a Lutheran gathering disguised as a prayer meeting, and the mood is electric. A woman with work-worn hands reads aloud from a German New Testament, her voice steady, her children listening wide-eyed. It hits you like a splash of cold water. Before this, most believers never heard the full Bible, not in words they understood. A mainstream fact flashes bright. Luther's German translation of the Bible, completed in the 1520s, was one of the first to be mass-printed and widely distributed. With it, the Church lost control over the narrative. You step outside and pass a priest nailing a rebuttal to a university board, his fingers shaking. Protest is contagious now, like laughter in a too-quiet room. In Paris, Wittenberg. Zurich, across Europe, scholars, printers and peasants alike are questioning everything. You overhear someone mutter, "If we can interpret the Bible ourselves, do we need a priest at all?" The implications are seismic. The old hierarchy is cracking like a cathedral roof under too much snow. And yet amid the upheaval, the Church fights back not with swords alone, but with strategy. The Counter-Reformation begins to simmer in the background, quietly organizing. Jesuits emerge as the intellectual warriors, opening schools, publishing books, and defending Catholic doctrine with philosophical precision, sharp enough to rival any Protestant pen. You sneak into a Jesuit classroom in Salamanca and watch as students debate free will using Thomas Aquinas, Descartes, and Paul, all in the same breath. It's less pulpit, more academic duel. Historians still argue whether the Church's slow reforms were genuine spiritual reckonings or desperate PR moves. But either way, by the mid-16th century, change had come. The Council of Trent was no mere bureaucratic reshuffle, it was a full doctrinal reboot. Bishops had to clean up corruption, seminaries were required, indulgence peddling was reined in. You imagine some ancient bureaucrat groaning, "We should have fixed this 2 centuries ago." He wasn't wrong. A fringe story floats around a tale of a rural priest who, upon receiving his first printed catechism, burst into tears because he finally understood what he was supposed to be teaching. Whether myth or not, it captures a truth. Even clergy had sometimes operated in the fog. Now the fog was lifting, and what lay beneath wasn't always holy. You wander through a tavern in Geneva, where Calvinists debate predestination over boiled potatoes. One man insists God already knows who's saved. Another counters. Then why bother trying? You sip a mug of ale and realize theology now invades everything. Taxes, diets, marriages. A woman is fined for dancing. A man is praised for burning his dice collection. There's a fever in the air, part righteousness, part paranoia. Outside bonfires blaze not of witches this time, but of books. Catholic texts in Protestant towns, Protestant tracts in Catholic ones. Everyone is purging ideas like infected linens. The smell of ink and ash clings to your cloak. You pick up a scorched volume of Erasmus and wonder if he'd be proud or horrified. Historians still argue whether the Reformation was inevitable or accidental, whether it was caused by Luther's theology, Gutenberg's printing press, or just centuries of pent-up frustration finally snapping loose. Back in Rome, the Vatican is reeling. The Sistine Chapel still shines with celestial glory, but the mood has shifted. Cardinals whisper in corridors, balancing outrage and strategy. Art once merely devotional becomes defiant. Counter-Reformation artists like Caravaggio paint raw, gritty saints with dirt under their fingernails and blood on their robes. You see St. Peter upside down on a cross, muscles, taut expression torn between agony and awe. It's holy, yes, but it's also very, very human. You step into a Protestant church, a plain hall with bare walls and pews made of rough wood. No incense, no Latin, no gilded saints. But the people here sing with fierce conviction. Psalms fill the room like thunder rolling over stone. There is no intermediary here, just you, your voice, and the words. It's oddly intimate, stripped-down faith that somehow feels more exposed, more vulnerable, more alive. A young woman recites the Beatitudes from memory, her accent thick but clear. You watch her father nod proudly. 2 generations ago, neither would have even seen a Bible. Now she's preaching its heart aloud. You feel your own pulse rise. This is not just reform, it's revolution. And it's spreading like fire in a dry forest. The church, battered and splintered, no longer dominates thought uncontested. But it survives. It adapts. It doubles down in some places, loosens its grip in others. It builds schools in colonies, sends missionaries abroad, trains new theologians who argue not only with the Protestants, but with each other. The grand monolith has cracked, but not crumbled. As you wander through the ruins and reinventions, the sermons and the street arguments, you begin to understand that this wasn't the end of the church's grip on history. It was a turning point, a shedding of skin, a reckoning with itself, a moment when humanity began to read for itself, speak for itself, and wrestle with truth in public. You pause under a twilight sky, the distant echo of debate still hanging in the air, like the final note of a long argument. You realize the Reformation wasn't just theological upheaval, it was psychological liberation. It shattered the monopoly on meaning. It gave people the terrifying gift of interpretation, and once that gift is given, it cannot be taken back. You take a breath, listening to the wind, rustling the leaves like pages turning. The world is louder now, messier, more divided, but it's also more awake. And though the church no longer owns every thought, it still stands remade, redefined, and still whispering in the background, "Let there be light." You stand now on the threshold of 1,000 years, staring back at an immense winding hallway of contradictions. The floor is paved with illuminated manuscripts and trial transcripts, the walls lined with stained glass and scorched pamphlets. Some doorways are gilded with divine beauty, others slammed shut with iron bars and whispered threats. This is the legacy of the church and its complex dance with human progress. And tonight you've walked every step of it. You feel the air shift as you return to the present, not to a monastery or marketplace, but to a place inside yourself where history lingers, quiet and echoing. You've seen monks preserve Aristotle with aching hands while bishops condemned Galileo for heresy. You've sat in candlelit classrooms beneath cathedral spires and wandered Renaissance workshops where saints and sinners wore the same smock. You've tasted both the ink of the printing press and the ash of burned ideas. And through it all, the question never stopped whispering. Did the church really hold back progress for 1,000 years? Here's the thing, they didn't shut the door. Not completely. But they didn't exactly fling it open either. They guarded the torch of knowledge sometimes so tightly it smothered the flame. Other times they passed it along even when their hands were shaking. They burned books and built libraries. They excommunicated thinkers and funded universities. They banned inquiry and birthed scholasticism. They censored scientists and then named craters on the moon after them. Historians still argue, oh, how they argue about whether the church was humanity's anchor or its sail. Maybe, just maybe, it was both. A fringe tidbit floats back to you, half legend, half metaphor, about a 14th century monk who carved a sundial into a prison wall so he could track the sun from his solitary cell. Even in darkness, he reportedly wrote, "I measure light." Whether he existed or not, his message remains: knowledge isn't always stopped by walls. It seeps, it echoes, it waits. You walk through the imagined hall one last time and picture the faces you've met, the sleepy scribe doodling in the margin, the scholar trembling before a tribunal, the architect sketching arches toward the heavens, the nun lifting a fevered child from a straw mattress, the translator whispering Aristotle into Latin under threat of censure. They weren't villains or saviors. They were people, trying, failing, learning, believing, just like you. And now you carry that same strange inheritance. You live in a world built in part by their contradictions. You scroll through ideas that took centuries to travel from parchment to page to pixel. You enjoy freedoms that were paid for in silence and sermons. You can question everything because others once could not. So did the church hold back human progress? Or did it hold on to it, terrified it might drop the flame? Maybe the more useful question isn't if they held it back, but what we choose to do with it now that it's in our hands. You breathe slowly, letting the thought settle. Now, as promised, let's bring you back to rest. Let your breath slow, like turning pages. Let the heavy doors of the past creak shut behind you, not with finality, but with gentleness. You've wandered through cathedrals and camps, through dust and ink and echo, and now you're home. Let your mind soften, like candlelight reflected in dark glass. The questions can wait. The arguments can sleep. Let your shoulders drop. Let the glow of curiosity settle low and warm in your chest, like embers humming beneath a night sky. And if you dream tonight, let it be of stone arches and whispered chants of stars tracked on parchment and questions too big for one lifetime. Because progress, like faith, is never a straight line. It's a spiral staircase. And you quiet now have taken the next step.